Welcome to the Renaissance and welcome to Applied History for Negroes Part 2. Important notice: it is not our intention to offend anyone with our videos. It is not also our intention to suggest, insinuate or preach hate towards any group, race, tribe or person. The goal of this video is for you to look for the books, journals, magazines or other publications referenced and study them yourself. Remember, the more you know about the past, the better prepared you are for the future. Theodore Roosevelt. And from Cather G. Woodson, those who have no record of what their forebears have accomplished lose the inspiration which comes from the teaching of biography and history. So, permit us to ask you, have you ever looked back in time by examining how things were between 1000 to 1100 to 1200 to 1300 to 1400 to 1900 AD, and AD means Anno Domini or Common Era, and Anno Domini means Year of Our Lord. Have you ever wondered how dinosaurs existed millions of years ago, but no Negroes were known before 1750s? Permit us again to ask you, do you just believe whatever you are told, depending on who is saying it and who he is talking about? How many times will someone lie to you before you stop believing them? Do you believe what you read or what you are told? Do you believe things that do not even make sense? How much of your history do you know? How do you use the history you learn? Do you compare historical narratives with reality? Do you compare what we do today with how it was done in the past? Do you remember to compare what you want to hear with the truth? And before our main topic of today, do you remember that the Indian wannabes and the slave masters alleged that only 389,000 Negro slaves were exported to the Americas during the slave trade between 1434 to about 1863? Remember, we had mentioned to you that the slave master most likely is behind this ugly narrative, hiding behind some lackeys to propagate it. So let us quickly reference modern history or the present state of all nations, describing their respective situations, persons, habits, buildings by Mr. Salmon, and it was published in 1735. Note the date of publication, 1735, and there we see the following. However, here it is that we meet with plenty of the best gold and ivory, and from hence the Europeans export 200,000 Negro slaves and upwards annually to America. Note this very well, 200,000 Negro slaves and upwards annually to America, which shows that Africa between the tropics must be vastly populous, though the ancients held that the torrid zone was not habitable. Now you see where that whole claim of 389,000 for the whole period gets debunked. Just in annually they had 200,000 in 1 year alone. So if we apply the basic arithmetic, we see that if annual export to Americas in 1735 was 200,000 Negro slaves, and the slave trade lasted from 1434 to circa 1863, in America at least, and to 1900 elsewhere, we have 1434 minus 1863, which will give us 429 years. So the total number of slaves would be 429 by 200,000, which gives us 85.8 million. So for those that are saying that the number of Negroes there make it difficult or impossible that they could have just been shipped from Africa, they don't understand the details of the slave trade. If they understand it, they won't even be bold enough or unashamed enough to say such a thing. So you see where the Indian wannabes run into problems. We know that the slave master is hiding behind them. Remember the same case with Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. Please remember that this is not designed to denigrate anyone. When the slave master came with the idea of integration to Martin Luther King Jr. and sold it to him. Malcolm X decoded that the slave master was coming for their money and rejected and turned down the idea totally. But Martin Luther King Jr. at that time thought that that would be good for his own people and accepted it. So you see the difference. The slave master was hiding behind him. That's why you see them celebrating him, having monuments for him, but there is nothing for Malcolm. That should show you exactly right there that is an interest they got from whatever they did with him. Now, don't get this mixed up. It's not that he hated his people. Perhaps he thought that was the best thing for his people at that time, but the slave master understands this game. If you looked at the Indian wannabes today claiming that, oh, the slave trade didn't happen, oh, we're indigenous, there will be reparations paid, we have been paid. Now, if you go and check the narratives of that Indian wannabe and the likes of the Calloway, you will discover that he now claims that the slave trade was not even slavery, but that it was employment, only they were not paid enough. So you see that the slave master is solidly hiding behind him. Now, if you doubt what we're saying, look for these materials, study them yourself, you will understand it. It's very simple. Don't listen to what he is saying because he is not older than you, maybe, even if he is, unless he shows you where he's getting whatever he's saying from, because he is very persuasive. The slave master understands how to pick someone from the Negro community, use that someone to propagate his lies. The lies are bought by him. If you notice, the Indian wannabes think it is to their advantage if they were indigenous, but it is not. It doesn't benefit them in any way. But if they can keep their Indian identity and not mix it up with the Negro identity, nobody will have issues with them. But you see how they are trying to enmesh the whole thing, merge the Negro identity with the Indian identity, which will ultimately wipe away anything called the slave trade and the horrors of it, the Middle Passage and all that. That's all they are working on. So ultimately, the slave master will still look like a saint. Whereas, despite the atrocities, you see how he ran away from it by claiming that Africans sold other Africans, without explaining how one man could sell 400 people and they won't mob him. Because at that time, they successfully convinced everyone that the Negroes were beasts and not human. So they don't even respond. If you know how cattle would be if you yoked it and moved it, that's exactly how they presented the Negroes to the rest of humanity. Now, here is a comment we got from one of the Indian wannabes, and he said, "Contemplating the glory of the place, there appeared to our view many pretty young Negro virgins playing about the well, but amongst those two that came down with either of them a natural pitcher, a calabash upon their name, a fetch water from this fountain, creatures of such shapes as would have puzzled Alienville, the great Mr. of Proportion, but to have imitated Antitioni or Andrea de Sana for softness of muscles and curiosity of coloring, though with a studied diligence and a love both to the party and the work. To express all the perfections of nature and parts, these virgins were owners of, would ask a more skillful pen or pencil than mine. Sure I am, though all were excellent, their motions with the highest, and that is a beauty no painter can express, and therefore my pen may well be silent, yet a word or two would not be amiss to express the difference between these and those of high Africa, as of Morocco, Guinea, Benin, Cacho, Angola, Ethiopia, and Mauritania, or those that dwell near the river Gambia. Richard Ligon, 1657. So he goes further to say, so again, Indians being called Negroes, when will you stop your nonsense and accept the truth? Africans and Indians are Negroes. So you see what he is claiming, that Indians are being called Negroes because they are saying to express the difference between these and those of High Africa as of Morocco. So he believes that these ones in Barbados are now different from the ones in, according to them, High Africa, which is Morocco, Guinea, Benin, Cacho, Angola, Ethiopia. So we see from this same book where he told us where the Negroes were obtained from originally. So let us reference the book he cited, and it's called A True and Exact History of the Island of Barbados, illustrated with a map of the island as also the principal trees and plants there, set forth in their due proportions and shapes, drawn out by their several and respective scales. And it was written by Richard Legon, Gent, and it was published in 1673. This is the 1673 version. Probably he had the 1657 edition, but we see what the book says. So here it tells us that they are fetched from several parts of Africa, who speak several languages, and by that means one of them understands not another. For some of them are fetched from Guinea and Benin, some from Katui, some from Angola, and some from the river of Gambia. And in some of these places where petty kingdoms are, they sell their subjects and such as they take in battle, whom they make slaves, and some mean men sell their servants, their children, and sometimes their wives, and think all good traffic. For such commodities our merchants send them. So our interest is for you to see where it says they acquired the slaves from. Now we're going to show you where it recorded them as different. Indians are totally different from the Negroes. As for the Indians, we have but few, and those fetched from other countries, some from the neighboring islands, some from the men which we make slaves. The women, who are better versed in ordering the cassava and making bread. Then the Negroes we employ for that purpose, as also for making mobi. The men we use for footmen and killing of fish, which they are good at. With their own bows and arrows they will go out, and in a day's time kill as much fish as will serve a family of a dozen persons, 2 or 3 days if you can keep the fish so long. So you see what we're talking about. Indians are totally different, which you can see from the same book recited. You notice that the Indian wannabes, just the same way they will quote Martin Luther King Jr. or Malcolm X and live where he is saying they are Africans. That's the same way they will quote a book and live where the whole thing is very clear. You see how he is claiming that because some Indians we are seen in Barbados, they were now different from the ones in Africa. Meanwhile, they were shipped there. That's why we showed you the number first, from sub-Saharan Africa, from Guinea to be precise, from what was Negroland. That's what they did. So he says that those ones there are now different from the ones back home in Africa. Remember, the slave master tried at that time to paint the picture of doing them a favor by capturing them and selling them and yoking them and using them as beasts of burden. So they've always had a narrative to make it look like it was to the benefit of the Negroes that we captured and sold them. Let us show you other things as well before we show you clearly that there is no way any sensible person can say Indians and Negroes are the same, and that we know where the slave master is heading to, because he's going to wake up one day, leverage on what their Indian wannabes are saying, and now say, oh, Indians and Negroes are the same. There was nothing like the slave trade. That's all he's working on. You will see it happen. Just take note of what we have told you today. And here again, from the same book, we see where it tells us that the Negroes and the Indians are totally different. It says, houses for Negroes and Indian slaves, with 96 Negroes and 3 Indian women. So if they were all Negroes and they're same thing, why would he say 96 Negroes and 3 Indian women if they were the same? He goes further to say, with their children, 28 Christians, 45 cattle for work, 8 milk cows, a dozen horses and mares, 16 whatever. But our interest is that it says 96 Negroes and 3 Indian women. It didn't say Negroes. We shall show you, it will get clearer by today. This is a new narrative being brought by the slave master through these Indian wannabes. The ultimate goal will be to say the slave trade never happened. If you notice, the same guy that is telling you that the Indians are Aboriginal and that the slave trade happened the other way around, if you look at it, it doesn't even pass a simple common sense test. At least we see the Cape Coast Castle today. We see the Elmina Castle. Those are footprints of the slave trade. We see many slave barracoons. We see their footprints. We know those that did it. But now, you see what he's saying, that the slaves were actually captured from America, shipped to Europe, from Europe to Africa, from Africa back to America. You see that it doesn't make any sense at all. So now what he's trying to tell us is that in all these places that they are writing of Africans being enslaved, they were actually talking about Negroes as at that time, whereas they were shipping to the Americas. He is now talking of when they shipped from America to Europe, from Europe to Africa, from Africa back to... What would the slaves be doing in Africa? Now remember, the reason the slave master successfully claimed that the people that were capturing were slaves in Africa is because they had a monologue. They were the only ones talking. Nobody could counter whatever they are saying. So you go to school, they tell you that. You come home, you go to church, everywhere they claim that it was done by the Negroes, which is not correct, because there were different races in Africa. There is no way you can say that the Ashantis, the Yorubas, the Fulanis are the same with the Negroes, but meanwhile they are working hand in hand with the slave masters against the Negroes. If that makes sense to you, please put it in the comment section. But let's just move forward. Let us also reference history of the Negro race in America from 1619 to 1880. Negroes as slaves, as soldiers, and as citizens, together with a preliminary consideration of the unity of the human family, an historical sketch of Africa, and an account of the Negro governments of Sierra Leone and Liberia by George W. Williams, and it was published in 1885. And there we see the following. Please notice that Sierra Leone and Liberia were mentioned. That's because the freed Negroes from Europe were shipped to Sierra Leone, while those from the United States were shipped to Liberia. Bear that in mind. They were previously shipped to Nova Scotia before Liberia and Sierra Leone. And remember, we told you that the slave master is solidly hiding behind this Indian and Aborigine narrative, which you shall ultimately find out. Let's just keep going. First, we see the preliminary considerations, and he says, during the last half century, many writers on ethnology, anthropology, and slavery have strenuously striven to place the Negro outside of the human family, and the disciples of these teachers have endeavored to justify their views by the most dehumanizing treatment of the Negro. But fortunately for the Negro and for humanity at large, we live now in an epoch when race, malice, and sectional hate are disappearing beneath the horizon of a brighter and better future. The Negro in America is free. So you can pause this video and read the entire section yourself, but our interest is to show you that the Negroes are totally different from the Indians. So first we see on top where it says, is it asked what caused the decline of all this glory of the primitive Negro? Why these people lost their position in the world's history? Idolatry, sin. This is, remember, they always try to convince the Negro at every moment that it is his sin that he is suffering for. Meanwhile, those that are telling him that do not even keep the laws of the Almighty, neither do they obey it. They are just more idolatrous than the Negroes themselves, but they always find some way to convince the Negroes that it is their sin that has reduced them to slavery. This is running from then till today. Remember, at that time they told them that why they were shipped to America was that the Almighty was bringing them there to cultivate the land for the people, and then he was going to come and do whatever stories they tell them, which is akin to what you hear the Hebrew Israelites tell you today, that the Negroes were enslaved, are going to be slaves for 400 years. Meanwhile, from the Bible, you see that they had already been slaves at that time. Something that happened in the past is now being brought to make it look like it's going to happen in the future, and it's happening. Despite having been there from 1619 to 2019, nothing changed. They still will not come back to review that view. They still will not change that idea, because when an idea gets into the head of a Negro, to eradicate it can only be by cutting the head off. That's what you're saying. No matter what you do, they will always believe the slave master ahead of the truth they can read themselves. So further down from within the highlighted portion, it says, but again, what was the cause of the Negro's fall from his high state of civilization? It was forgetfulness of God, idolatry. Righteousness exalted a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. The Negro tribes of Africa are as widely separated by mental, moral, physical, and social qualities as the Irish, Huns, Copts, and Druids are. Their location on the dark continent, their surroundings, and the amount of light that has come to them from the outside world are the thermometer of their civilization. It is as manifestly improper to call all Africans Negroes as to call Americans Indians. Note that very well. So it's improper to call all Africans Negroes as it is to call Americans Indians. But they are now telling us that no, Indians are the same as Negroes. Indians are referred to as Negroes, which doesn't actually make sense if you looked at it very well. Now, we have asked them to show us a book where they said Negroes are the same as Indians. They have not been able to do so. They will only go and leverage on where, because both races were enslaved. So when they discovered that the Indians, the Native Americans, were not as strong as the Negroes, they decided to be capturing the Negroes and shipping to America, to the New World they called it. At that time, America hadn't even been formed as a country itself. It just had the plantations from the Europeans, planting the crops and exporting them and all that. So you understand how this thing, when the Indian wannabes tell you a story today, they will tell you as if the United States has existed that way for a very long time. That's not the case. It was built through slave labor, and it's still kind of an offshoot of the Europeans till tomorrow morning. So don't think of America as though it has been there since the beginning of time. No, it was part of the New World, and it was built through slave labor, Negro slave labor, and Indians as well. Anyways, let us also look at something of interest on the right. Now remember, the difference between us and the Indian wannabes is we look at things that we don't really understand, or we debate here and can't find a common ground as to what they mean, and we try to present them to you and expect you to give us what you think could be the meaning. Whereas the Indian wannabes will always want to convince you with their lies, which we are sure must have been sold to them by the slave masters. Now remember, the question to ask is, someone who is taking all his time, putting in energy, efforts to claim that the slave trade didn't happen, which puts the slave master at a level, a moral ground that is an advantage to him. What is his interest? If he claims that he's gonna get something like reparation, if someone who captured and sold your forebears from their homes forcefully, used them for free labor for years, did not agree to the crime, did not pay you reparations, what makes you think he will agree to pay you any reparations even if you claim you were indigenous, when it's not true? Because he also knows you are not. He has his records, you don't have it. The Negroes only started reading and writing around 1750s, despite the world being about 6,000 years, at least according to their Bible. So that should begin to tell you right there that there must be something they are hiding. There must be a goal they have, which they have not shared with everyone. Remember, we told you the case of Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X and integration. Now, Martin Luther King Jr. did not buy into the integration narrative because he was not fighting for his people, but because he thought it would be the best thing for his people at that time. But Malcolm X decoded that no, these guys are coming for our money. We prefer separation, and the Negro allowed to develop and build his own civilization the way he knows it. But they didn't like that. So you see, that's the same thing happening now. They have come to say, oh, say you're Aborigine, this will happen, that will not happen. That's the type of thing. They will propagate that theory, propagate it, because they know it is to their advantage. Now, if you really want to understand this game very well, go and study what they wrote about the Negroes, how they reason and how they behave. That's why they say when an idea gets into the head of a Negro, to eradicate that idea can only be by cutting the head off. That means they have really studied the Negro. So all they need is, if they can sell this Aborigine nonsense to them, they start teaching the children from childhood that there was nothing like that, they were Aborigines. Then ultimately the old people that knew about the slave trade will die, and then there will be nothing like the slave trade. Then after that they will face something like civil rights and claim it was not there, even when the Negroes are not free till today, which we shall ultimately show you, and you will see it very clear how they remodeled the slave trade, because they believe that the Negroes were created to be slaves forever. And we shall show you this when we look at what is happening in what was Negro land and Guinea today, as against what could have happened at that time. So here again we see what it says, but in our examinations of African tribes, we shall not confine ourselves to that class of people known as Negroes, but call attention to other tribes as well. And while in this country all persons with a visible admixture of Negro blood in them are considered Negroes, it is technically incorrect, for the real Negro was not the sole subject sold into slavery. Very many of the noblest types of mankind in Africa have, through the uncertainties of war, found their way to the horrors of the Middle Passage, and finally to the rice and cotton fields of the Carolinas and the Virginians. So, in speaking of the race in this country, in subsequent chapters, I shall refer to them as colored people or Negroes. So you see where he brought in that division and tried to explain why he will use colored people, because not all people that were sold. For example, when the Fulanis were sold in error, the Mandingos sold in error, the Yorubas sold in error, you can't say the Negroes were sold, because those are not Negroes. They may be Negroid, but they are not Negroes. That's why you see them working very closely with the slave masters, which we shall show you how they play their game, how they play their role as far as the slavery and enslavement of the Negro is concerned. And it is happening till today. We shall use what is happening today to explain that to you. And when we have done so, you will now open your eyes to what they are doing, and it will also help you decode what they are doing. Here again we see where it says, in all the matters of law, civil and criminal, the slave had no rights. Under an act of 1705, Catholics, Indian and Negro slaves were denied the right to appear as witnesses in any cases whatsoever, not being Christians. But this was modified somewhat in 1732, when Negroes, Indians and mulattoes were admitted as witnesses in the trial of slaves. In criminal causes, the slave could be arrested, cast into prison, tried and condemned with but one witness against him, and sentenced without a jury. The solemnity and dignity of trial by jury, of which Englishmen love to boast, was not allowed the criminal slave. You will see this thing very well today if you looked at Nigeria. Look at the legal system. You will see that the non-Negroes, the Negroid group, liaise with the slave masters against the Negroes. And if you study their cases, you will understand. If you doubt what we're saying, the simplest case for you to see is investigate the IPOB and the Fulani jihadist terrorist herdsmen. You will notice that the Negroid group that own the press will propagate lies against the Negroes, because the IPOB are Negroes, and that's the last bastion of Negroes in that area. As it stands, if you doubt what we're saying, investigate, research. That's all we want you to do. So these people work together. Like we told you, the Nigerian army was a slave hunting terror group. It was only renamed or remodeled around 1863. So that is why they are above the law. You can't take them to court. You can't do them anything. This is why they can go and invade the civilian. They can murder anybody. Nobody will talk. That's the truth. The press will not write. They will even write in their favor. Give you 10,000 reasons why the army should have killed the person. But they forget that because they are the same color with the people they are murdering, they are actually sending the wrong messages to the whole world that we are fools. We kill our siblings. That's the mistake they make, because like we told you, the Negroid and Hamitic groups, they lack common sense. They lack humanity. They don't have the milk of human kindness in their veins. If you doubt what we are saying, just find somebody in the Nigerian army, engage him and ask him, okay, why do you people kill yourselves? You will see that he will not tell you anything sensible. You will actually be wondering if such a person is human. We challenge you to try it. You will see what will happen, and you will understand what we're saying. So here again, if you noticed, in the previous one, the Negroes were mentioned different from the Indians. Here again, you see where it says, not satisfied with colonial legislation, the municipal government of the city of New York passed in 1710 an ordinance forbidding Negroes, Indians and mulatto slaves from appearing in the streets after nightfall without a lantern with a lighted candle in it. The year before, a slave market was created at the foot of Wall Street, where slaves of every description were for sale. Negroes, Indians and mulattoes, men, women and children, the old, the middle-aged and the young, all as sheep in shambles, were daily declared the property of the highest cash bidder. And what of the few who secured their freedom? Why, the law of 1712 declared that no Negro, Indian or mulatto that shall hereafter be set free shall hold any land or real estate, but the same shall escheat. There was therefore but little for the Negro in either state, bondage or freedom. There was little in the world to allure him, to encourage him, to help him. The institution under which he suffered was one huge sepulchre, and he was buried alive. The poor groveling worm turns under the foot of the pedestrian. The Negro winced under his galling yoke of British colonial oppression. So you see the thing, if you want to investigate this further, you will notice that the British is the strongest ally of Negro subjugation in Africa today. If you doubt what we're saying, we challenge you to go and look at Ambazonia, look at Biafra, look at the agitations going on there, look at the wars going on there. Now monitor the media channels, the BBC, the VOA, Al Jazeera, and see how they underreport or do not report those things at all. That will begin to tell you. You don't need them to tell you. You just need to figure it out yourself, because they know what they are doing. That's all you need to do. You just need to monitor these people. Look at Biafra, look at Ambazonia. That's all you just need to do. That will show you the role of the British as it was then. That is what it is again till today. At least you noticed that the Negro was recorded as different from the Indians and mulattoes, because mulattoes were when the slave master slept with a Negro woman and produced a child, which according to the slaves, if you were to read the accounts of former slaves, they bore the brunt of the anger of the slave master's wives, because they were not happy that the slave master slept with the slaves. You can understand that if you were to look at or read the accounts of those former slaves. These are the things the Indian wannabes are working with the slave master to wipe off. If you notice, they now claiming that the slave trade didn't even happen. Now ask yourself, if they were genuinely fighting for the Negroes, why are they not considering, even if it was one person that was sold from Africa, why do they want to discount that? If you notice, they don't even want to mention that. They say it's only 389,000. Even if we assume, but without conceding, why do they want to wash that totally away and face their Indian? And even that, if you notice, they would have just faced being Indian and claimed they were Indian, they were not Negroes. But instead, they are now saying Negroes are the same as Indians. That should show you right there that the slave master is hiding behind them. There is no way a sensible person will just wake up, saw an atrocity done to his siblings, he now decides to deny it himself for no benefit at all, and then discount the other ones, even if it was two people that were captured and yoked from Africa that endured the dangers of the Middle Passage. Why do they want to write it off? That should begin to tell you right there that it is the slave master hiding behind them. So right on this page, you will see where it says, in the feeble condition of the colonial government, the Negro grew restless. At the first, as previously shown, the slaves were very few, but now in 1712 were quite numerous. The Negro, the Quaker, and the Papist were a trinity of evils that the colonists most dreaded. The Negro had been badly treated, and an attempt on his part to cast off the yoke was not improbable in the mind of the master class. The fears of the colonists were at length realized. A Negro riot broke out. A house was burned and a number of white persons killed. And had it not been for the prompt and efficient aid of the troops, the city of New York would have been reduced to ashes. Now, what was the condition of the slaves in the Christian colony of New York? They had no family relations. For a long time, they lived together by common consent. They had no property, no schools, and neglected in life, were abandoned to burial in a common ditch after death. They dared not lift their hand to strike a Christian or a Jew. Their testimony was excluded by the courts, and the power of their masters over their bodies extended sometimes to life and limb. These conditions of affairs yielded its bitter fruits at length. Now we ask you, if you looked at the courts in sub-Saharan Africa today, that's exactly how the model works. If a Negro finds himself there with someone who is not Negro, they're not going to even hear the case. That's the truth of it. Whether you have your AU, Amnesty International, UN, is total BS. They are not useful as far as the Negro is concerned. If you doubt us one more time, we challenge you to investigate Biafra and Ambazonia, investigate IPOB and the Nigerian Army, which was a slave hunting terror group renamed Nigerian Army in 1863. We challenge you to investigate that as well. You can't take them to court. If you notice, they raided the civilian's house. The civilian house, they can't find justice. They have no place to seek redress because the army is above the law. The army is an institution of the slave trade, and it remains so. And remember, the slave master took the position of God. That's just what it is. If you doubt us, we shall explain it in subsequent editions. But we want to move forward. At least you have seen that the Indians were classified as different from the Negroes, which we shall continue to show you in different places before we round up. So here again, you see where it says, in August 1712, a law was passed prohibiting the importation or bringing into the province any Indian servants or slaves, but it was only intended as a check upon the introduction of the Tuscaroras or whatever, or other revengeful Indians from South Carolina. Desperate Indians and insubordinate Negroes were the occasion of grave fears on the path of the colonists. Many Indians had been cruelly dealt with in war, in peace, enslaved and wronged beyond their power of endurance. Their stoical nature led them to the performance of desperate deeds. There is kinship in suffering. There is an unspoken language in sorrow that binds hearts in the indissoluble fellowship of resolve. Whatever natural and national differences existed between the Indian and the Negro, one from the bleak coast of New England, know that very well, and the other from the tropical coast of Guinea, were lost in the commonality of degradation and interest. The more heroic spirits of both races began to grow restive under the yoke. The colonialists were not slow to observe this, and hence this law was to act as a restraint upon and against their rebellion and hostilities. And the reader should understand that it was not an anti-slavery measure. It was not hostile to slavery as a system. It was but the precaution of a guilty and ever-knowing public conscience. So our interest is for you to see that it was the Negroes from Guinea and of course the Indians from New England. The Indians are indigenous, no doubt about it. The Negroes are not. They were forced and yoked and shipped from Africa. So if they were the same, why would they tell you here that Indian and the Negro, and tell you that this one is from another place and this one is from the other place? Now remember, this book was written by a Negro, so that you don't think that, oh, it is written by the slave master, because the Indian wannabes will always say, oh no, these books were written by the slave masters. This was written by a Negro, which you can check and you see what we're talking about. They cannot all be wrong. The issue here is that the slave master wants to see how he can merge the two races he had oppressed over time, although not to the same level. So by that singular act, he will be able to wash his hands off what he did to the Negro during the slave trade. That's all they are trying to do, nothing more. So you can pause this place and read the entire thing yourself, but our interest is on the right, where it says, and yet the Puritans put the Negro slaves in their colony on a level with horses and hogs. Let the intelligent American of today read the following remarkable note from Judge Sewall's diary, and then confess that facts are stranger than fiction. 1716, I essayed June 22 to prevent Indians and Negroes being rated with horses and hogs, but could not prevail. Colonel Taxter brought it back and gave as a reason of non-agreement they were just going to make a new valuation. So you see what we're talking about. And you notice that it was a colonel that brought it back. Remember what the army is supposed to be doing. Despite the army in the Western world conquering nations, the armies in sub-Saharan Africa were designed for the slave trade. That's what they were. That's what they do to today. That's why you see that the army cannot attack those murdering people like the Fulani herdsmen, which you can just Google yourself. That's all you need to do. It does nothing to them. It leaves them unfeathered, because the Fulani herdsmen come from within the army. Remember, you have to be trained on weapons use before you can go to a community and kill 100 people and walk away. And that's who they are. So because they come from the army, they understand the game. So all they are playing is hide and seek. So you can't take them to court. There's nothing you can do. They are solidly supported by the slave masters, and the Western media is solidly behind them. That's exactly how the slave trade happened. If you doubt what we're saying, investigate. That's all we challenge you to do. Put it in the comment section that yes, you did investigate and this was what you found out. Investigate Ambazonia, investigate Biafra. That will begin to show you. It's very simple. We shall ultimately show you when we get to the economics of modern day slavery and the historical part of it. You will understand what we're saying. It might not be very clear to you, especially if you're an Indian wannabe or in the Western society where things look like they are the same in your mind, but they are not. So when you hear an army, you think it's a government. You think what we have in sub-Saharan Africa are governments. If you think they are governments and not just mere slave masters' puppets, why not ask yourself, which type of sensible human will be in power, has billions to buy weapons with, but his brothers and sisters are drowning in the Mediterranean to get to Europe, and he does nothing about it? He doesn't even mention it. That should begin to tell you right there that must be a difference between those dying in the ocean and in the Mediterranean and in the desert and those that are in power there. This is very simple to see, but we shall ultimately show you and show you some of their comments to those effects that will enable you assess their mental state, their ability to reason, and what they are doing. This is very simple, but let's just move forward. At least you've seen right here and in all the places we have read that the Indians were mentioned differently as the Negroes. There is no doubt both races were enslaved, which is totally different. It doesn't mean that Negroes are the same with Indians. It's just like saying, oh, okay, if you bring an Asian and an African and let's say in South American and make 3 of them slaves, then it qualifies you to say that they are all the same. It doesn't make sense. Even if you check your records, if you are in the United States, if you check your census records, you will discover that blacks are even different from Negroes. Without you knowing, you will discover that the Indians, as in the country called Indian, those with straight hair are classified differently from those with woolly hair, even though the skin, everybody is dark skinned. So the issue is not the dark skin, it is the woolly hair. This is a very important point for you to note. But there's something we want you to compare with what we just read here about where the Negroes were classified as horses and hogs. This is very critical to our discourse in this video. So we want you to compare the classification of Negroes as horses and hogs in America with what you're going to see here. And we reference Cardinal Lavigere, Primate of Africa, adapted from the French by Reverend J.J. Bean and was published in 1898. And there we see the following. So please, we want you to compare what we are going to read now with the idea of classifying Negroes as horses and hogs in Americas. We want you to see how the slave trade happened on both sides of the globe, so you understand what we're talking about. And it says here that, but I cannot resist saying today that of the errors so fatal to Africa, the saddest is that which teaches with Islam that humanity is made up of 2 distinct races, one that of believers destined to command, and the other that of the cursed, as they style them, destined to serve. Now in the latter they consider the Negroes to constitute the lowest grade, namely that on a par with cattle. So you see, while they are classified as horses and hogs in the Western society where they are used as beasts of burden, in sub-Saharan Africa, in what was Negro land and Guinea, they were classified as beasts lower than cattle. And it goes further to say The Negro, in their estimation, is, as Leo XIII forcibly says, a beast destined for the yoke. Having reached by their conquest the heart of a continent peopled by Negroes, the Muslims have therefore betaken themselves to the work, which is justified by their doctrines. So you see the thing, there they are classified as horses, here they are classified as beasts lower than cattle. Our question to you is this: if all the colors were supposedly the same, the black people, you would say they are all Africans for the Pan-Africanists that can't reason. How do you think they identify who was and who was not? That's our simple question to you. You need to understand that there must be a group different, and they identify them, and we have asked you to start your research by investigating or researching Biafra and Ambazonia. Watch the body language of the slave masters. Watch the body languages of the people back in sub-Saharan Africa, the Fulanis, the Arabs, the Berbers, the Tuaregs, the Kanuris, the Yorubas, the Ashantis. Watch their body languages. You will understand. Why not ask yourself why an army will be massacring and murdering innocent civilians, unarmed, young people, as we are talking about 16, 17, 18 years of age. They murder them in their hundreds and thousands. Your slave master will not report it. The BBC will keep quiet. Your amnesty will not be there. They will all keep quiet. Why not ask yourself that simple question? What is the AU doing? Why are these people there? How come the presidents do not condemn it? Nobody is facing trial for those things. Then you would have started understanding. You don't need us to tell you anything. Pick up these books, read them yourself, look at history, investigate Biafra, investigate Ambazonia. Ask yourself, if the army of the United States goes to fight in Iraq, in Libya, in Afghanistan, and the armies in sub-Saharan Africa, in Cameroon or in Nigeria, fight in their own place, so how do they know who to kill? They have to find a label. You will hear them say, oh, they are rebels, they are this. Rebel against who? Rebelling against who? If you notice, what they do is like beating a child and asking it not to cry. You will hear them stop people from work, close the companies, starve them, and then arrest them for stealing. The same thing they did with the slavery in places like the United States, in Europe, and wherever in the Middle East. That's the same thing they are doing to today, which we challenge you to investigate. So imagine if the so-called African Americans had a good understanding of Africa and the races there. Their own media would have been able to report some of these, but unfortunately their own media is all about entertainment and of course their religion. Notice something very interesting right here. Notice where it says there are two classes of humans, the cursed, who are destined to be slaves. That's all they did with their religions at that time. They convinced the Muslims that people who were not Muslims were cursed. That's all. So they have to help them capture the Negroes, because the Negroes had a way of life. They did not have a religion. Now ask yourself, they told you that they were bringing Christianity or Islam to civilize the Negro. Now that you see missionaries and some Negroid groups bringing back the Christianity to Europe and America and coming to preach and telling them how their own Christianity is not the right one, why not ask yourself this simple question? Are they now coming to civilize the Europeans and Americans? Of course, the answer is no. That will begin to tell you what the game is all about. It's deeper than what we can tell you. That's why we challenge you to conduct your own research. But let's move forward. Again, a thing of interest on the right of this page is where it says the impunity is absolute. No Negro chief of the small independent tribes, among whom all the countries it's divided, has the power of repressing this violence. Now we challenge you, if it is through violence they were acquiring the slaves, it can only be done through an army. We challenge you, tell us how somebody can sell you. If you keep saying, oh, our ancestors, Africans sold other Africans, as they used Professor Gates to tell you, now tell us how somebody can sell you, and you just stand there and they sell you and you start moving. If you can tell us how you get to the point of getting on the slave ship, how they handle you, then you would have started understanding what the game is all about. But the slave master understands one thing: when a lie is told often enough, it begins to look like the truth. That's why they keep selling, sell. Who sold who? It was the slave hunting terror groups like the Nigerian army. So all they need was they glorified them, made them, put them above the law. You can't do anything to the army. If the army wants to kill an entire village in sub-Saharan Africa today, they just go and massacre them. The slave master will turn the other way because they are still doing what they have been doing. But let's just move forward. So remember the book we cited earlier of 1735 that told us that the slaves were acquired from Guinea. So if you look at this map of Africa, it's from the same book. You see where it shows you what that area where you have Ambazonia and Biafra today looked like at that time. You see that it shows you that the lower part is Guinea, the upper part is Negroland. Now remember, those countries, when they partitioned them in the 18 somethings, it was just to remodel the slavery and the slave trade. They still had to use the Negroid groups, the Hamitic groups, to in-yoke and enslave the Negroes. They do not know because they lack common sense. Like we tell you, we still tell you, we challenge any of them to come here. You will see that they lack common sense. Even from their debate, you will see them telling you things that are exactly what the slave master is telling them. You will see it clearly. Their views are the same. But the moment you say, why don't we stop buying the slave master's weapons, they will turn against you and say they want to fight terrorists. But they forget that the terrorists were supposedly their own brothers. But the slave master knows how to incite them against their own. He knows how to harness their stupidity, their foolishness, and their lack of common sense to swell his bank account, which unfortunately they lack common sense. There is no explanation you will give them that will make them reason like humans. Unfortunately, they now make all of us look like the same. So when you look at the color of the skin, you will think, oh, they are all Africans, they are the same. Ask yourself, why the so-called African Americans, why are they not asking, why are these wars in Africa? They just see it as wars, the same people fighting themselves. Whereas they should have been able to now dig down to the granularity, look at the body language of the slave master, ask themselves, how do the weapons, because supposedly the people in Africa are not productive, they do not manufacture weapons. So how do the weapons get there? Even when the weapons are so expensive, they will tell you they were smuggled. But then they should be able to find out who smuggles it, passes it on to people that are supposedly beasts akin to cattle, and they know how to shoot, and know how to capture, and know how to make wars. That should begin to tell you right there that the slave master is behind all these things, and right there, hidden in plain sight. So you see from the map, at least you have seen Guinea, you see where it says Ethiopia, you see where it should show you Biafra that they are killing people over today, which used to be known as Bight of Biafra, because they were not interested in the internal country. They were interested in capturing the slaves, and the Bight of Biafra was like the port of Biafra, where they yoke or ship the slaves from. Likewise, in the Bight of Benin, which is also a major slave port at that time. This is why you notice that the media in places like Nigeria, in places like Ghana, Togo, Ivory Coast, all those countries, they will not mention these things. They will pretend not to hear about them. They won't even talk about them, but they know, their records show it. But of course, they are not allowed to say anything that goes against the interest of the slave master. But let us move forward. At least you see where it says Ethiopian Sea before it gets to the Atlantic Ocean. Then it used that whole area, they used to be called Ethiopia. They keep changing it. So what they did with the countries, like you have places like Nigeria, Gabon, Cameroon, and all those things, what they did was to rejig and remodel the slave trade from individual slavery to corporate. That's all they did, which we shall show you how they made the transitioning. You will understand it the moment you start looking at what is happening in places like Biafra, in places like Ambazonia. You will understand exactly what we're saying. It will be very clear to you. Let us also reference Ismailia, a narrative of the expedition to Central Africa for the suppression of the slave trade, organized by Ismail Khedive of Egypt by Sir Samuel W. Baker, and it was published in 1875. And there we see the following. Now remember, these are some of the things the Indian wannabes are helping the slave master cover up. It was not easy to stop the slave trade at all. So if they help them succeed in selling their Aborigine nonsense, they would have effectively wiped off all these their atrocities without knowing. That's exactly what they are trying to do, nothing more. So here you see the treachery of the Negro is beyond belief. He has not a moral human instinct and is below the brute. How is it possible to improve such abject animals? They are not worth the trouble, and they are only fit for slaves. to which position their race appears to have been condemned. I believe I have wasted my time and energy and have uselessly encountered difficulties and made enemies by my attempt to suppress the slave trade and thus improve the condition of the natives. Now, if you look at this, you are going to think that it is the Negroes that were turning down the offer to stop the slave trade, which is not correct. The reason is because the non-Negroes, the Hamitic groups, the Berbers, the Tuaregs, the Arabs that lack humanity, they lack common sense, they go and stand in and pretend to be Negroes to the Europeans that were coming as people coming to help stop the slave trade at that time. So when they stand in the gap, they now pretend, but they now spoil the show. If you notice, when you see some of them, let's say the Fulanis in the US, they will tell you that, or the Yorubas, or even the Ashantis, they will tell you that the Yorubas were also sold. Their alibi is usually that they were also sold. But the moment you say by who, or how come you are saying by you are also sold, but you are not happy that we are exposing who did the selling, you will now discover where they stand. So that's the same game they play with the slave master. They come in such a way that they frustrate the slave master in any good effort. If you doubt what we're saying, if you were to go to, let's say, a place like Nigeria to say, oh, these Biafra people or Ambazonia in Cameroon, you have suffered enough, let me see how we can help, they will come and hide in between because they have the same color, to come and be telling you something like, oh no, it's not, we don't need Biafra, we don't need Ambazonia, they didn't kill us, they've not killed us before, they don't even kill anybody. They can be telling you things like that. If you doubt what we're saying, investigate. So when they tell you like that, you will not be saying, or you feel confused that the people you think you want to come and help do not even need your help. But you wouldn't know that it is those non-Negroes, they plant enemies within. They understand that game very, very well. So this is why, if you doubt what we're saying, investigate. That's the best way. Investigate. Find a way to get a neutral investigation. Go to places like the Middle Belt of Nigeria, for example. Go deep and find out how they are suffering, as against what they will tell you by the press. So you will begin to understand. So when you go there, you will see that the government will not even allow you to talk to those people. Then when you raise this issue, why is the government following you or preventing you from accessing them? They will refer you to how the US government does not allow people see people as well. Refer you to how Saudi Arabia doesn't allow people to video or film anybody, because there are still Negroes in those places, but the media will not show you those Negroes. That's the thing. You will think that the whole of Middle East is full of Arabs. There are Negro slaves there till tomorrow morning, but they are able to convince everybody that there is nobody there, and the whole thing is still happening. Why not ask yourself how the slave trade happened for 400 years plus and still happening, and it looks like nobody even talked about it? And then the Indian wannabes have jumped out from nowhere to help the slave master clean his mouth after eating the whole shit. So you understand what we're talking about. But let's round up shortly. So you have probably seen where they showed how the Muslims were capturing the slaves, and you have probably somehow heard that Islam forbids the slave trade. You probably may not know that Islam, Christianity and Judaism are just different sides of the same coin. They do the same thing, they work together, they act together. You can even start by asking yourself, how come the so-called September 11 attackers were from Saudi Arabia, but they did not attack Saudi, they attacked Afghanistan? According to them, somebody called Bin Laden was hiding there. So they knew where he was, knew where he was hiding. But suddenly he wasn't hiding in Saudi. They understand what they are playing at. Ultimately, they will make you feel that, oh, God is protecting these people and protecting these people. If you notice, in all places they will tell you that the Negro is a sinner. That's why the book we just referenced was telling you that the Negro is an animal. Now, when we look at their basic propaganda and how they do it, you will understand all these things. But let us quickly, before we round up, reference Travels and Voyages Through Europe, Asia and Africa for 19 Years by William Lithgow, and it was published in 1735. And there we see the following. This Muhammad, that's the name of Muhammad before they changed it to Muhammad, it was Muhammad, was born Anno Domini 591, that is in the year of our Lord 591, in Ethiopia or whatever, a beggarly village in Arabia, whose father was Abdilas, an Ishmaelite, and his mother Khadijis, a Jew, both different in religion and also of diverse countries. In his youth, he was partly taught the Judaical law and partly the superstition of the Gentiles. Many allege his parentage was never known, being so bare until his riper years betrayed the same. I also learned that his parents died while he was a young child and was turned over to his uncle, who afterwards sold him to one Abednego or whatever, a merchant in Palestine. And he, after a little time, having remarked his ready and prompt wit, sent him down to Egypt to be a factor in his merchandise, where by his dissimulate behavior he crept in favor with Christians, Jews and Gentiles. He was in proportion of whatever, but our interest is for you to see that the mother of Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, was a Jewish woman. Now ask yourself, how can Muhammad create a religion that will hate his mother's people? Does that make sense to you? If it makes sense to you, please put it in the comment section. We're going to round up here. And before we conclude, let us reference historical causes and effects from the fall of the Roman Empire 476 to the Reformation 1517 by William Sullivan, and it was published in 1838, and there we see the following. So please notice the applied history thing we are talking about, where it says, in history a great volume is unrolled for our instruction, drawing the materials of future wisdom from the past errors and infirmities of mankind. Buck. So this is important. That's why we need you to use your knowledge of history and look at what is happening today. This is very important. So we see what it tells us again, that Muhammad's mother was a well-informed Jewess. Jewess means a female Jew. And he had a monk and a Jew in his own house. Such is the statement. To account for the fabrication of the Quran, Muhammad declared that it was originally written by the hand of the Almighty on the skin of the goat which Abraham sacrificed in place of his son, and that it was brought down and delivered to him by the angel Gabriel in parcels at various times. So now that you have seen that the Muhammad's mother was a Jewish woman, it is important you think very well before you kill your brother or your sister over a religion that was brought by the slave masters, whether it be Islam, Christianity or Judaism, especially those of you in sub-Saharan Africa. Now remember, we are not asking you to believe us. We are asking you to use your common sense and stop emulating those that lack common sense. Remember, the Almighty created you and somebody as siblings first, before you became either Muslim, Christian or Jew. So murdering your brother or sister over Islam, Judaism or Christianity should actually show you that you don't have common sense. Now remember, do you think Muhammad could have created a religion and asked them followers to hate people like his mother? If the answer is yes, he is wrong. If the answer is equally no, then you have to learn. You have to learn how to be a brother. Be your brother's keeper. Do not allow the slave master's message to turn you against your own brother. Do not raise up your hand to kill your own brother over something that you have nothing, you know nothing about. You can at least see, if you didn't know this before, you can at least see the importance of looking back in history to understand what may be going on. So again, before you murder your brother, especially those of you from Biafra and Ambazonia who are fighting your siblings over these religions without knowing that they are one and the same, they are all designed for the benefit of the slave masters. If you have looked at the role of Islam and Christianity and Judaism during the slave trade, you will equally see their role in today's world. For those from Biafra land, for example, during the war, you probably knew that the Arabs flew the planes. Those were Muslims. They didn't have that pity. The planes were manufactured by the Christians and Jews. They gave it to them. So you have to see that they work together. And that's exactly how the slave trade was done. So in the event you still do not understand, we challenge you to study the books you even have. Study these materials yourself. Put two and two together and ask yourself, If these things were actually things that lead to heaven, how can somebody who has not given you food, somebody who will kill your children without looking back, without any show of humanity, no love, bring you something that can take you to heaven? If you think it is possible that they can hate you the way they do and still give you something that can take you to heaven, please put it in the comment section. We will be very happy to hear it, because it is strange and it is impossible. And here we come to the end of this edition of Applied History for Negroes Part 2. We thank you very much for listening, and we challenge you to conduct your own research, or at least look for the materials referenced. Study them yourself. We want you to put in the comment section where you think we got something wrong or where you think we lied. But do not argue without substance. Do not just come to make comments just for the sake of it. Research everything yourself deeply and very well too. Have a positive attitude, a positive mindset, and think about the good of the entire Negro community. Not just yourself, not just your family, but the entire Negro community. We know why we're telling you that. We thank you very much for listening, and we do hope and encourage you to find time to look for these materials and study them yourself. Peace.